about referendum is that in a normal circumstance, a referendum is strictly a matter of domestic law, and you evaluate it in the first instance by looking at how the domestic legal system considers the referendum. So, for example, when the Scots wanted to have a vote on independence, they talked about it in Edinburgh and they talked about it in Westminster in the UK Parliament, and they agreed within the UK system to have a referendum. And so the rest of the world really had no reason to question that referendum. It was agreed by the relevant parties. The thing about the referendum in Ukraine, in Crimea, the Crimean area of Ukraine, is that, first of all, it wasn't the result of any negotiated settlement with the government of Ukraine. The parliament in Kyiv, the executive officers in Kyiv had nothing to do with it. It was completely confined to people in Crimea. There was no parliamentary settlement. It wasn't a Ukrainian law that said, let us have a referendum. So that's a big difference. Another difference is the heavy involvement of an external military force. There was sort of a funny kind of hair splitting about whether the force was external. Many of the Russian forces were already there. Well, the United States has forces 20 miles from Cambridge at the air bases. Those are external forces. If they ignored the status of forces agreement and invaded Cambridge, which I don't expect them to do, they wouldn't do, but if they did, that would be an invasion. It doesn't matter how they got there. If they're using force against the will of the host country, that's not just a tourist visit. So the Russian forces in Ukraine, practically, for all intents and purposes, were invading forces for the reason that they were not acting under the treaties that had invited them to be there. And it seems that other forces were introduced as well, but that's legally a fine distinction. The point is, when you have basing rights, the basing rights do not allow you to overthrow the local government and seize territory. So the referendum was held in under an emergency situation in which foreign armed forces had practically taken over the region in which the referendum was held. So that's a problem. First problem, the referendum is not the result of Ukrainian law. It's just a local exercise. Second, it's a local exercise with an external force overseeing the conduct of the referendum. The third point is that, a third point is that the referendum took place in an extremely compressed timeline. American presidential elections seem to never stop, but even in the UK, for example, where the government has relatively short election periods, it's still a real election period. You have weeks and weeks to actually talk about what's going on, and the candidates can present their arguments. Well, this all happened in the space of about a week. There was a rapid escalation. A declaration was made that there would be a referendum, and before you know it, there was a referendum. That's very problematic. Now, you're not going to find any explicit international text. You're not going to find a treaty that says how many days do you need for a referendum campaign? How do you write a referendum question? You're not going to find explicit language in a treaty telling you how to do it, but you will look at how countries have responded to referenda in other places at other times. And the most successful referenda in modern international law have had some degree of either international supervision or a high degree of domestic buy-in by the relevant legal and political institutions. You have the Scottish referendum where the entire UK system said, yes, you may do this, let's do this. And then you have referenda in some of the old colonial territories, like what's now the Indonesian part of New Guinea, or parts of Cameroon, where the United Nations itself passed resolutions and was involved in the referendum process. So there was no doubt that those referenda were carried out in a fair way and ascertained the actual desires of the people in the territories. So to carry out a referendum without consultation with the country concerned, to do it under armed occupation, and then to carry it out on such a rapid basis is really untenable. Just does not create any confidence in the result.